hold on for a moment. There you go. So I'm really looking forward to our second speaker, Jessica Tsang. So Jess is a product designer at JobAdder, where she helps build and maintain their design system. Interestingly though, her career didn't start in design. She was actually a front-end developer at the start of her career. And I loved hearing about this because you often hear the question, should designers code, but you don't really hear about it in reverse. But in a design system context, it just makes so much sense, and I'm sure her team can vouch for that. So folks, please join me in welcoming Jess to the stage. You have a choice. What do you want?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here. So I'm here to be a little bit vulnerable today and bring on talking about the ugliness of working on design systems. I think we all here know that it's not always pretty, so I'm just keeping it real. So as you know, my name's Jess. I am, like Richard mentioned, I'm a product designer here at JobAdder. I've been working on it for about 3 years, and as mentioned prior to that, I was a developer. So without further ado, a little bit about JobAdder. Now, JobAdder has been around since 2007. It's a recruitment software. We are about 200-ish people, and our design team is even smaller, so we've got about 6 people in our design team. Now, it's quite a mature product, and with a mature product, we know that it's always constantly going. We're working with a very immature design system, and it's been through multiple design system iterations. And as we know, when that happens, there's a lot of tech and design debt. So I'm here to talk about our journey at JobAdder in resolving a lot of that, and it will be a quick glimpse of what we've been through, just a high-level glimpse. Now, everyone here, as we all work on design systems, we all aim for consistency, scalability, accessibility, efficiency, all the good stuff. But with a live product, starting over is a luxury. It's rarely an option. This is a big facepalm moment. So coming in, we assume that people know what a design system is and how to use it. It's pretty straightforward. Yeah, laugh all you want. So, yeah, but you know, it's not really how we do things here. Now, what we found out very quickly was that people didn't know how to use the design system. They thought that a UI kit was the design system, and with that left a lot of gaps. So with the gaps, as a result, a lot of trust was lost. So then what do we do about it? Why are people losing trust in us? How do we rebuild that trust again? And as every designer does, we ask why a lot. But to who do we ask why? The people who work closer to us, so our designers, our developers, business analysts. How we did this at JobAdder was even just casually we asked feedback. It may not be a fancy workshop, although sometimes it was, but usually it's just working hand in hand with your peers, figuring out why they feel the way they do. And with that, at the same time, what you can do is also spread design system awareness and education. So it's done on many levels. What sort of worked for us at JobAdder was we inserted an engineering champion. So every vertical in our team had someone who could advocate for the design system. So what we learned through a lot of the research and feedback that came back from working at JobAdder was the design and engineering team were not always on the same page. So that meant when someone spoke about one thing, they were mentioning another thing. So the next thing was we settled for matching semantics. Now, before I talk about design debt, what I want to touch on briefly is a little bit about buy-in. So this is another battle that some of us face, is how we can get buy-in to actually do the work. At JobAdder here, we were lucky enough to use sales, customer success, and marketing data to help us get that buy-in. So what you can see here is we gathered our reasons for lost deals and why people were churning from JobAdder. A lot of the feedback came back as functionality and inconsistent UI. People were feeling confused and they didn't know what to do, so that was how we got buy-in. Now, back to tackling debt. Now, it's not just design debt, but tech debt as well. I know I'm halfway into my slides, but our design system is called the Scales. So how this came about was our branding was initially a snake, because JobAdder and Scales, haha, yeah. So coming in, we figured out that there were quite a few challenges we were facing. So we didn't have any dedicated engineers. We're working off a third-party library, namely NGZoro. And what was in our Figma libraries did not match what was in our development libraries, so lots of room for improvement. Some of the expectations that we had starting off and based on our feedback was, okay, we're going to have to start from the ground up. We have to come up with ways where design and development have to speak the same language now. And what that meant was, okay, let's start from the smallest things. So, although it's a little bit illegible here, but the icon namings were very different. It was still the same. For example, we've got arrow up, and then in the development space, we've got arrow upward. So, very, very pedantic. Now, we expected that we were able to match things perfectly one-to-one, but what we had to settle for was having the same semantics. So what we had in our library before, you can see that little icon there, that was called dashboard before, but then engineering knew it as Kanban. So then we did a lot of work to match the semantics of even the token levels. So although it didn't match exactly visually, we had design and development speaking the same language. So the expectation was that, okay, let's start small and then we'll work big. And that way we can build more trust in the design system. Although that sort of worked, it solved some of our tech and design debt, but it didn't bring enough impact. And that was quite important for buy-in. So what we are tackling now is larger and more impactful components. So this also involves doing a bit of an audit, finding out what your more impactful components. Here you can rely on research and figure out where the largest impactful components lie. For us, we had our drawer components. So being able to solve at this level helped us with buy-in and visibility. When it comes to documentation, yeah, this was huge learning. So what we did was we needed to build trust. We had that in mind, but we didn't want people looking at our work until it was quote unquote ready. But what really worked out was some Confluence doc. Having something is better than nothing, even if it meant 2 lines. So some of the wins and learnings from our experience, there's quite a lot, but to condense it into this time slot here, I kept it very brief. What we did manage to do was rebuild and match our tokens. That took a lot of work. Then design and engineering referring to the same component. So we went from this JSON file to something a little bit more usable. Although we did have some wins, we also had a lot of learnings as well. So the effort that it took to adopt some of our components was just way too large. There were a lot of technical complexities along the way which stopped us or delayed some of it. Overall, what really helped us was a mindset shift. So the process was quite ugly, but the beauty was more about what you were really looking at. So not so much you were looking at, but what you were looking for. What we did gain was a lot of teamwork and a lot of learnings from failing hard and failing fast. Questions?
Thank you, Jess. I guess we'll do the usual thing, open up for questions. Do we have one at the back there? Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you so much. I just wanted to ask a question. You mentioned that you use sales and marketing metrics to understand UI consistency, and I just wanted to know what kind of metrics they were. Like, were they conversion rate, bounce rate, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so we used a lot of closed and lost data. We approached sales and asked why we had potential users turning away from JobAdder, and we asked what made our current users happy. So from sales, what we got was, we asked them, why are our users turning away from us? How many are turning away, and what was the reason? So those were, I hope that answers your question. Yes. Yeah.
I have an online question, which I'll ask first, and then I think you're next. Nice, cool. So this one is, how do you and your team manage new changes in component/pattern and communicate it with your development team? So I guess it speaks to keeping things in sync between design and code.
So usually this is very, very collaborative. What we do weekly is we have a UI weekly alignment. One of the projects that we're working on is upgrading JobAdder's UI. So having a lot of involvement, really getting people early on in the journey helps bring along awareness and help prioritize what needs to be done next. So bringing in your product managers as well to help prioritize and get that awareness of what component brings more value and why really helped us advocate for which components to work on.
Cool, yes.
Hey Jess.
Hello.
It's great to see that you've got to semantic level parity. Are you now looking at component level tokens? Or have you already got there? And if you have, how have you set up Figma? Are you going to that next level in Figma, or is that a step too far and too many tokens everywhere?
If I understand this correctly, how we dealt with the tokens is foundations are a non-negotiable. So getting that buy-in first, saying that we cannot fix any debt unless the foundations are solid. So working on that, we had to ask ourselves, how much time do we need? And how do we communicate that to higher up? So getting that buy-in first, and then once we actually did the work, so happened that variables came out, so that was handy. We started using variables, and with that, it was a lot easier to introduce that to the developers and get that a one-to-one matching. So it does take time, there's a lot of moving parts, but it's a matter of asking for pardon and patience with your teammates, being very collaborative to get that buy-in from the primary user level as well. I hope that answers your question.
And we nerded out about this, like when we were kind of chatting up before you did the talk, right? And I think this aligning on the foundations is so important, because even if things aren't visually aligned right, if they're kind of on this, you know, using the same tokens, the changes or the updates will happen eventually because they've kind of aligned on what matters, and then the rest kind of happens through course, and that's kind of where you get bang for buck with collaboration. Well, that was scratching of an ear, not a hand raise. Luke.
Thank you for the presentation, Jess. Just a question on where you had the tokens, for example, or the naming convention not being aligned on both the design and the dev side. I was just wondering if you could walk us through what that conversation looked like to try and correct that.
Yeah, so in some of our examples, we had incorrect grouping. So let's just say if my primary text color was a certain hex code, our structure was, I guess it's pretty similar to usually everyone else. We've got the hex code, the raw naming, and the actual semantic naming. So that was quite a new concept for a lot of people in a company. Parts of it was education on why we're doing certain things. What worked for us was showing a live example. For example, we had a button with a primary text, and we had another component, and we gave it a wrong semantic to illustrate what would be wrong if we did change primary text across the application and the consequences of what happens at that level. And that helped us with the buy-in and the education. With our actual approach, we had to, once again, start small and start slowly adopting and taking bite-sized pieces. So you're not going to see immediate changes. It's a long process, and it will be a continuous process.
Thanks.
Testing. There we go. Thanks, Jess. I wanted to ask a question about manpower, or muscle power. I can see myself in a really similar position that you were in before you started this process, and the anxiety that you see when you're creating so much initiative, but then there's a lot of design debt. Our tech team actually has tech debt, like 3 times a year. We don't. How much muscle power went into that from a design perspective? And development as well.
Yeah, so at JobAdder, it's quite interesting. We don't have any dedicated developers. What we did was we had rotating developers, or any new developers who started. We had a program called Bootcamp, and we'd introduce them to the design system in like a 2 to 3 week intensive course, so they would learn about the design system and hopefully advocate. But during the whole period of us working on tokens, I worked very closely with one of the developers to get it pushed to production. Luckily, I was able to produce the JSON file and be able to implement some of it as well. So being able to do that really helped. Knowing a bit of code does help. So all in all, that probably took about 3 months of working 100% on the tokens. And even now, it's still not quote unquote perfect. So, yeah.
I might extend on that one a little bit. You mentioned, offhand that having a little bit of development experience helps. For someone that has kind of a foot in both camps, what do you hope that designers would know about code, and what do you wish developers knew about design? You don't have to answer them both, you can pick one.
That's a hot take. I'll start with designers. So knowing code myself has definitely given me an advantage, but once again, it's just a tool. I also know of designers who know nothing about code, nothing about how software is built, but they're still able to get by. But definitely knowing code will help you communicate with your developers a lot easier, and it will make them feel at ease as well. As for developers, knowing a little bit about design, this is where empathy comes into play. Having them know the why, although I'm not saying developers aren't interested in the why, but having them brought on the journey and seeing why things are made a certain way will really help with that buy-in and give you that time to work on what you need to do to fix that design and technical debt. So, yeah.
Nice. I think we have time for one more question. Over to you. You can borrow mine.
Thank you. Question on how did you manage your updates and your releases? Like, how was it communicated to the design teams? Yeah, just management of that.
Yeah, so this is a process that we're still working on, and it's been a lot of trial and error. What has worked for us normally within the design team is bringing a lot of people in, we communicate and set a program where, okay, every component that we complete, let's release and test this. It could be a simple Slack message saying, hey, I'm going to publish icons right now, please check your design files and make sure that everything's okay. So it's very staged, same time. Similar process with developers as well. We make sure that QA, BAs and our PMs are across it as well, saying, hey, we're going to release so-and-so component. Please make sure that we've checked everything or everything has been checked in, and make sure that everything's clean. So, yeah.
Nice one. Thank you, Jess. Give everyone one more round of applause.